Jonah chapter 1 verses 17 through chapter 2 verse 10 is this poetic expression of Jonah praying out to the Lord in response to the compassionate works that God is doing in his life. So at the end of chapter 1, we see God appoint a fish, this big old fish, whatever it may be, to swallow up Jonah, save him from drowning. And then at the end of chapter 2, we see the Lord speak again to the fish, and the fish vomits Jonah on dry land after 3 days and 3 nights spent in the belly of the fish. And in the middle of those events, we see Jonah's prayer to the Lord. It's not necessarily the only prayer that Jonah prayed in the belly of the fish, but it is a prayer of thanksgiving in response to the salvation that God was working in his life, which Jonah, I think, recognized in the swallowing of him up in the belly of the fish. Now, he may have not known what was ahead of him, but he did know that God had spared him from death by drowning when he appointed that fish to swallow him up. So in this lesson, this really gives you an opportunity as a teacher to really speak as a shepherd to the sheep, as just a loving guide to them, because this message is full of the compassion of God. At Jonah's lowest point, so this is the lowest point of Jonah, physically and spiritually in the entire book. Chapter 4 is another low point, but it doesn't come near to this. We see him going down into the belly of Sheol, just a figurative expression of him being as good as dead. And we see Jonah receiving and experiencing the compassion, the grace, and the kindness of the Lord in this very deep and dark moment in his life. And you don't know what your people are going through. You probably have a good idea, but there are still some people who are going through just some very deep and dark times in their life. And they just really need to feel the compassion of the Lord. And this is an opportunity for you to remind people that even in our lowest points caused by our own sin at times, our own failures, our own moral failings, that the compassion of the Lord still is available to them. He shows compassion to us at our lowest points. And this, though, is not necessarily filled with warm, fuzzy feelings. Jonah almost drowned. He was in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, experiencing potentially the pain of stomach acid burns or whatever it may be. This was compassion revealed through discipline. And we don't think of discipline and compassion going hand in hand together all the time, but as a parent, discipline is a way of showing compassion because it protects your kids from future mistakes that could potentially be harmful. Some may have not experienced the healthy discipline of a father that is pictured in God's relationship with Jonah. So they may not have that frame of reference, but the picture is still there nonetheless, that God shows compassion through his discipline, because it leads and corrects people into the way of righteousness and away from the destructive path of sin. And then we see at the very end, we see Jonah responding, saying salvation belongs to the Lord, and he has an opportunity to have a new future, a new life in the Lord, because he says, with the voice of thanksgiving, he's going to sacrifice to the Lord, and what he has vowed, he will repay. So Jonah's future was on one path before the fish, and now after the fish, or after the salvation of the Lord, his future has been transformed. And that's just a good recognition of a point, is that God saves us, and he transforms our future. The compassion of the Lord is not meant to just show us grace and then enable us to continue in our sin, but no, it transforms us. It gives us a new future to walk in, where we forsake the vain idols, where we forsake the selfishness of our actions, and we begin to walk in a spirit of thanksgiving and ministry unto the Lord and unto the glory of the Lord. And in this passage, there's a couple ways that you can apply it. One, we need to reflect the same compassion of the Lord towards others. And two, we just need to do what God has called us to do in ministry. And then another way that you may want to bring this passage forward is in the Gospels of Matthew. Jesus refers back to this moment and likens it to his resurrection. It's just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So it's a picture of the resurrection of Christ, and this gives you a good opportunity in your lesson to practice sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with the three circles technique, and you can walk through that with them. And that's how God shows His compassion to us. Because while we were in brokenness, Christ came. He lived a life of righteousness for us, died a death of sin in our place, was buried in the grave, bearing the curse of death in our place, and was raised from the grave 3 days later, extending life to all those who return and repent from their sins and believe in the gospel. So that is a great ministry of compassion. In fact, evangelism is the pinnacle of compassion, because it's speaking life and hope and the power for change in their lives to people who are dead in their sins. So look for ways to show compassion. Look for ways to live out the ministry that God has called you to, and specifically with the compassion aspect and in the ministry, practice sharing the gospel, because this is a picture, a shadow of what was to come in the resurrection of Christ.